petrol stations asked, can I borrow a can for the petrol? And the man, and not wanting to wait hours for the can to come to the station wagon, and looked around for the biggest receptacle she could find, and it turned out to be a bedpan. So she took the bedpan back down to the petrol station and she filled the bedpan with petrol. Now here's a nun walking down the side of the road with a bedpan. Truck on the side of the road pulled up, a couple of workmen having their lunch, and they're watching this nun walk down the road. Interesting. Nun walking down the pavement with a bedpan. But she came to the back of the car and poured the contents into the tank. One workman turned to the other and he said, you know what? He said, I'm not a religious man, but if that car starts, I'm going to church on Sunday. If that's what got you at church this morning, God bless you. It's great to have you.
That's great.
Because God wants to touch your life this morning. I want to talk to you about a principle. I want to give you if I give you the title of this message, you'll be confused. So I'll wait for a little while before I talk to you about the title of the message. How many people have heard about Noah? Anyone heard about Noah? Put your hand up if you've heard about Noah. Put your hand up if you've never heard about Noah. Elders will drop around this afternoon and explain it all to you. Everybody's heard about Noah and the ark. You see, interesting person, Noah, because by the end of his life, everybody else was dead. Well, everybody except his wife and 3 boys and their wives. 3 of his sons, 3 sons and their wives. 8 people. They're all gone, except for Noah. Now, you've got to ask a question. How come Noah was the only one who survived the flood? How come Noah had the privilege of taking his family on the ark and they all survived and everybody else died? Well, it's a great question. Difficult questions are answered in the Bible. Read your Bible. Well, here's the answer as to why Noah survived the flood, found in Genesis chapter 6. Listen to what it says. Now, this is the account of Noah and his family. Now, Noah was a good man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Well, that's why Noah was the man. He was such a good man. He was righteous and upright among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Good man. Well done, Noah. Now, it must have been fantastic to have Noah for a husband. I guess Mrs. Noah woke up every morning and said, oh, Noah, you're a good man. If you weren't such a good man, I'd be toast. Must have been wonderful to be one of his 3 boys. It must be wonderful to grow up in a home of a man who's this good. You wake up every day and you say, oh, Dad, I'm so grateful for you, Dad. Because if it wasn't for you, Dad, we wouldn't even be here. We'd be toast. Must be wonderful to have a man like that in your life. Question. How come if these 3 boys were so blessed by having such an amazing dad, just a couple more chapters down the Bible, one of them ends up cursed? Oh, good question. Very good question. Difficult questions are answered in the Bible. Read your Bible. Well, here's the reason why one of these very fortunate boys ended up cursed. Now, Noah was a man of the soil, and he proceeded to plant a vineyard, and when he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father lying in the nutty, and he told his 2 brothers outside, "Hoo-hoo, Dad's lying in the nutty, boys." But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, and they walked in backwards, and they covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father naked. And when Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." So why did this unfortunate lad end up cursed? Because his father was a bad man. It's a bad man that gets so drunk he doesn't know if his clothes are on or off. And that's a paradox. See, a paradox is a contradiction. You ought not to find those 2 things together. A man ought not to be such a good man, the only reason you're alive is because of him, and the only reason you're cursed is because he's a bad man and gets so drunk he doesn't know if he's in the nutty or not. But did you notice it wasn't Noah who ended up cursed? It was his boy. It was his son. I want to introduce you to a thought, the parental paradox. The thought that your parents can do you good and they can also do you harm. But it's the children who have to handle the paradox, or it's the kids that will pay the price. So that doesn't sound fair to me? Well, I wasn't here to tell you so much today what's fair. I just want to tell you what's true. And if I can turn the lights on for you today, whether you like it or not, I can help you. Because every one of us will face a paradox with a parent who is imperfect. And if you don't learn to handle their imperfections appropriately, it's you that will end up paying the price. Now, this is not the only time this occurs in the Bible. If this was a one-off, you'd say, oh, well, Al, you can't turn that into a principle. I mean, there's nothing to learn here. Move on. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. But no, there is something to see here because it's not the only time it appears in the Bible. In fact, the parental paradox becomes a subplot of one of the most interesting books in the Bible, and that's the book of 2 Samuel. You see, in 2 Samuel, there is a hero. And the hero is the great King David. And in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, David, who's been pursued by the nasty King Saul for years, finally hears that King Saul has died on the battlefield. Well, what's he going to do when he hears that news? Woohoo! The wicked king is dead! The wicked king is dead! No, he doesn't do that. He's not dancing on the grave of King Saul, because he's a good man. He writes a lament. How are the mighty fallen? Because David's a good man. In chapter 2, the tribe of Judah come to David and say, David, you're such a good man, you should be king over our tribe. And David is appointed king over the tribe of Judah. In chapter 3, he begins his family. It's a little different than the average family because David's got 6 wives. But what a man he is, because each one of these wives starts popping out sons, one after another. 6 wives, 6 firstborn sons. Wife number 1 produces son number 1, his name is Amnon. Wife number 3 produces son number 1, his name is Absalom. And these boys are growing up in the house of a really, really good man. Amazing to have a dad as good as David. Well, in chapter 4, David discovers that somebody murdered Saul's son, Ishbosheth. Now, you'd think they thought they were doing David a favour, but when he finds out, he punishes them for it, because you ain't going to treat people. We don't have murderers in this country, even when they're dealing with my enemies. In chapter 5, the whole nation comes to David and says, Davy, you're such a good man. You shouldn't just be king over one tribe. You should be king over all of Israel. And David is crowned the king of Israel. In chapter 6, David finally captures the city of Jerusalem. And then he installs the Ark of the Covenant and sets Jerusalem up as the capital city of worship in Israel for the very first time. He's a very important man. In chapter 7, God comes to David and says, David, you're such a good man. I'll make a promise to you. There is going to be a king reigning over Israel that comes out of your body, and he'll reign forever and ever. And that's fulfilled in Jesus, the one we call the Son of David.
Amen.
In chapter 8, David has one victory after another. In chapter 9, he discovers that Saul's crippled offspring, Mephibosheth, is still alive. Well, we're going to kill him? Oh, no, he's a good man. He brings this crippled young man in who could be a threat to his own household and throne, and puts him at his own table and treats him like one of his own sons. In chapter 10, David defeats the Ammonites. Is there nothing this good man cannot do? Chapter 11 is a bad day in the office. Spots a neighbour's wife having a bath. Invites her over for a game of chess. Turns into a very vigorous game of chess. She ends up pregnant. What do you do when you get the neighbour's wife pregnant? Well, you bring him home from the war, get him to sleep with his wife, and no one will ever know whose kid this really is. But here is a man so loyal to his king and his own men He's not willing to have one night with his wife while men under his command are risking their lives on a battlefield. He sleeps on David's doorstep. How do you treat a man and honour him for that kind of loyalty? You murder the guy. And you'd have to admit that murder and adultery is a bad day in the office for the average man. Chapter 12. Nathan, the prophet of Israel, comes and puts his bony finger in David's face and says, David, you are a bad man. What a paradox. That you can be such a good man that you are known as the man after God's own heart. You wrote half the Psalms. You become the plumb line against which every future king of Israel is going to be judged. And yet you're such a bad man, you're known as an adulterer and a murderer, and here I am telling the story all over again. But watch it spill over into his family. In chapter 13, his eldest son gets the hots for his half-sister Tamar, drags the girl into his bed and rapes her. What's Daddy going to do about that? Well, Daddy's just been exposed by Nathan the prophet as an adulterer and a murderer. It's really difficult for Daddy to discipline his son for rape when he's just been exposed as a bad man. David does nothing. But the girl has a big brother. His name is Absalom. He waits for 2 years for his dad to address the wickedness, and when he doesn't, he decides to take things into his own hands. He murders his brother and skips town. One dead son. He waits for a phone call from his dad that never comes. For another couple of years he's waiting for Dad to deal with the family crisis, and when he doesn't, he starts to agitate amongst his father's friends to be allowed to come home to Jerusalem again, and Daddy gives him permission, but he still doesn't make that phone call. 2 more years down the track, this kid is so angry with his dad he starts burning things down. And finally, 7 years too late, they have that conversation. But by chapter 15, an angry young man is standing in the gates of Jerusalem saying, would that I was king in Israel. In chapter 16, he goes after his father's throat, and the entire nation is in a civil war. In chapter 16 and 17, David is running for his life. But in chapter 18, that same young man is hanging by his hair from a tree, and 3 javelins are sticking out of his chest, and his father is in an upstairs room sobbing his heart out. Oh, Absalom, my son, would that I could have died for you. Oh, Absalom, my son. What is that? That's a paradox. It's a paradox. You can grow up in the home of a man as anointed as David was, and yet because he's not only a good man and anointed, he's a bad man too, you end up dead. And did you notice it wasn't David who ends up dead? It's 2 of his boys. See, that's the parental paradox. He had a father who was imperfect. His father was both a good man and a bad man, but he never handled the paradox appropriately, and it was the 2 boys who ended up dead. And I tell you, my friends, you've got to learn to handle the parental paradox, or it'll damage your life. It'll eat your lunch. Fact of the matter is, parents are a paradox. I don't know. I mean, maybe you have perfect parents. There aren't that many of them around. The reality is that you and I are extraordinarily crafted by the face-to-face God, that we are relationship beings to the core of our Maker. And often we have not fully appreciated how profoundly the good things in our parents have marked us, and how profoundly the negative things, the inadequacies in our parents have marked us. But you ought to take note of how a child learns a language, how a baby learns a language. You know, language is one of the most important skills that you ever have in life, the ability to communicate. English isn't an easy language to learn, yet I'm doing okay. Well, how did I learn English? There must be a big government department somewhere, because nobody's born with a language. You're not born with English or Japanese or Korean. No, you come with nothing. Just a little learning computer, that's all you are, with nothing, blank slate. Well, there must be a big government department somewhere. There must be experts and textbooks. They must be teaching all these kids because they can all. No, that's not how it happens, is it? All it requires for you to learn a language is for them to put you in a cot and stick you in a household. And there in that household, you start sucking in the vibe of the thing.